Good evening and welcome to Art Talk. I'm Laura Womack and with me is Jen McHugh, Technical Director.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited about this show.
I think we all are, as is producer Jean Mihitch. And we're excited because today we have Lisa Naples, a sort of modern day Beatrix Potter sculptor with an edge. Her creations are often animals that draw you in with their charm, rabbits and crows in human situations dealing with human questions. Her animals have a complex interior life. Lisa has studied widely, transitioning from a potter to a sculptor and a storyteller and to a conduit for ideas that come to her from an unseen realm. She says at this point, Clay and I are dear old friends, and her experience in the studio is a conversation. And we're going to talk about that conversation with her tonight. Lisa's work is in the permanent collection at the Michener Art Museum, which will present a solo show of her work in 2025. She's exhibited widely, including many shows at the prestigious Philadelphia Museum of Art Craft Show, where she was the recipient of the Jane and Leonard Corman Prize for Excellency in Contemporary Ceramics in 2012. Lisa was awarded a residency at the Clay Studio in Philadelphia, as well as at the Australian National University in Canberra by the National Council for the Education of Ceramic Artists. She's a frequent exhibitor at the Phillips Mill Juried Art Show, winning multiple awards over the years, and her work has appeared in numerous magazines and books. She has an MFA from Nova Scotia College in Art and Design, signed with esteemed William Daly. She has taught workshops throughout the country and continues to offer a range of classes in her studio in Frenchtown. She was recently featured in Rivertowns magazine and on the Ceramics Arts Network. Lisa Naples, thank you so much for joining us on Art Talk.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's delightful to be here.
We also enjoin all of you to join the conversation. Please put your questions for Lisa in the Q&A where we can find them easily. And Jen always puts useful information in the chat, so we'll keep that clear for her. All right, we like to start out right off this wonderful art. Okay. Lisa, where are you here? I mean, in your studio, obviously.
Yes, right here in Frenchtown. And that piece in progress in that photo was shot as part of the shoot for Rivertowns magazine. And so that piece is going into the glaze kiln actually this weekend. So it's finished. The piece that's at the Michener it's called Gestation 2 because I made that piece in Gestation 1 back in 2020, and I really had no frame of reference for those pieces. So they sat and gestated. And I really just, I couldn't tell you how, that's Gestation 2. That Jen just had up there. Yeah, this one. So you can see that this is one vessel that's becoming two. It splits. And I find that a good vehicle to start exploring this dualistic human experience, the dualistic mind. But I wasn't sure if they would become representational or stay abstract. And they immediately became representational because that piece that in the former photo has rabbit heads on it and they're interacting with each other. But then the following piece that I've just finished this week is non-representational. So that's kind of interesting, kind of going back and forth. But I'm learning.
It seems to me, Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, that most of your artwork is representational. So is this a new phase for you?
Well, the lens of hindsight will will tell us. But yeah, I mean, to make the piece that I just finished in the studio and it doesn't have any figures on it, I really feel out on a limb. I feel like I am excavating at a deeper level. It takes more courage for me because I love the stories I tell through the rabbit, but they may not be necessary for what really wants to come forth here. Like, you know what? I like European films because they don't bang you over the head. They don't give you too much information. You know, it's like, it's kind of like that. I want it to be as like a poem. I want it to be as reduced as possible, to say what I have to say with as few words as possible, so to speak.
So when we were prepping for this, we talked a lot about different stages and how challenging it is to move to a new phase. But I want to look at some of your artwork before we explore more of that. But let's try to get back to that. Okay.
Yeah, see here, this piece was non-representational. My focus was to play around with, I just stacked geometric forms. This is part of a series that went on for 2 years of stacked geometries. And so this piece was probably about 20 inches tall. And it was fired in a wood burning salt kiln. So the surface is, you don't get a more gorgeous surface than a wood burning salt kiln, because the atmosphere interacts with if you do glaze it, the glaze, and if you don't glaze it, just the clay. But this was before I even addressed surface myself. I wanted to study form and figure out what was special to me, how I could express my spirit in form alone.
Did you have the idea for this beforehand?
This particular piece?
Male and female, male, female.
Heck no, I didn't. In fact, I named it male and female when I was sending the slides. At the time, this is from the 80s. At the time, I wouldn't have conceived of that. But I can see it now. It's really clear to me. This is male and female. It's like, this is an interesting piece to have back in my, in front of me right now. It's so many years ago, and I have no idea where it is, But this is like, so like going to using this piece, there were a lot of stacked geometries, and then eventually they had these handles. There's one gem that has that blue vase with handles, which this series grew into. And then I stayed with those. Yeah, so you got the mid to late 80s, these pieces. Once they became vases and they had those handles, and the handles started to orbit the pieces, they were going back way out into some kind of a realm that was unfamiliar. But as soon as they became vases, they became comfortable. So if I have a function, there's an ease. There's like, it deserves to live because it has a use in the world, So it's taken me, I think I've been at this for about 45 years. And it's taken me this long, given who I am and my constellation of tendencies and personality traits, to allow myself to really just let it rip, like these pieces for the Michener, I am letting it rip. I have no idea how they'll be received, but it feels amazing to be able to delve in, to go down deep inside myself and make these pieces. And if I hadn't taken this session off of teaching, like artists need time and space. I'm running a business and I've been teaching and I'm making a living. So if I hadn't taken the risk of not teaching this whole winter session, I'd be in trouble, in terms of getting the work ready for this show. So that piece, male and female, turns into this piece. You see, this is still stacked geometries. There's 1, 2, 3 thrown forms that have been connected, and then the handles.
Lisa, I'm interested that when you talk about this, you said in this period, the handles started to form and move around the vase. I mean, you talk about it as if you have no agency in this creation. You don't have to comment if you don't want to.
No, I have so much to say about that, and I'm just taking a minute to reflect because we only have an hour,
Right.
Here's the thing. I have agency. I have all the agency in the world. I can say yes, I can say no, but I wonder where these ideas come from, you know, and there's an evolution, there's a development. So I said that series of vases, stacked forms, they went for 2 years. And why did they stop? Why did I move from that back into pottery making? Because they started orbiting, because the handles started orbiting the pots. So like first they started out as just flat slabs that got wavy. And then they became these dimensional slabs. See those, they're thrown on the wheel as like a low cylinder that doesn't have a floor, and then they're cut off and turned into these handles. But I made them this shape instead of this shape, you see? So they started getting some volume themselves, but then they started to orbit the pot. And I know I'm speaking about it this way, but I'm following something. I'm following, it's like a breadcrumb trail that's being laid out. And I don't know the whole thing ahead of time. If I did, I wouldn't do it. If I did, there would be no interest in taking the next step. So there's mystery, and there's I definitely feel there's some sort of collaboration going on, you know, like I'm working in concert with a creativity. Let's just call it that, you know, these kinds of concepts and talking about them with words, it's hard because they're kind of wordless things, right? They're just, you're in your studio, you work, an idea arises. Where'd that come from? You know, sometimes it's a fantastic idea and you just feel like so grateful for it, you know, but it's not coming from my mind. My mind's engaged. You know, I'm as present as I can be, but not just with my brain, my cognitive brain, but you know, my body is there and I'm present in my body, and my heart's there and I'm present with my heart. So I'm bringing my whole self, and then I'm receptive. I feel very receptive. And sometimes ideas come and it's like, no. So who's saying no? Who's the idea and who's saying no? And that's like this work for the Mitchners is about this. It's about these splits of personality coupled with divinity. I don't know what else to call it. Spirit, the unseen world. That's clearly part of our human experience. I say clearly because in my life, there's no question in my mind.
Okay. This is going to be the theme, everyone. This is what we're talking about as we're looking at the artwork, and we'll find out more aspects as we go along. Is that right, Lisa?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, Jen, what's up next? All right. This is going back.
Yes, so this is years later than that blue vase. The blue vase in that series of 2 years work yielded to really large, fanciful serving dishes, functional pottery. And then eventually it became more intimate in its scale. So here's a ewer. It was also around this time that I had children. And so pattern making started on my pots. I started decorating pots with pattern. I could make brush marks to beat the band, but I wasn't rendering images. I didn't have the idea that I could do that. I didn't have the idea that I could do that. You see, it's like there's so much fear and trepidation, and I just find it takes so much courage to continue to take these next steps and these next steps and these next steps. So this piece that's being shown right now is part of a 15-year progression. So I'm out of school, I'm making a living, I actually started slip casting. When we had kids, I remember my ex-husband saying, "You're gonna have to figure out how to make money while you sleep," that I wouldn't drop my income, you know. And he meant it in the most supportive way. It was just like, how can we do this? So I started slip casting, having molds made of some of the forms that I was repeating through slab building. And once, and that was a big no-no when I was in graduate school. Casting was like, there was a judgment about that, which is so silly now as I look back, because what it did for me was it allowed me to have much less preciousness about the pieces that I was making so that I could start decorating. It gave me a lot of freedom in decoration, because if something didn't work out, I could toss it without thinking twice. It didn't take me a couple of hours to make it. You know, I could even have an assistant make the bodies of these pieces. They had a lot of finished work, but that's why the decoration started. That's when my brushwork started. And when you have little children, you've got clothing that has stripes and polka dots and all kinds of fun colors. And, you know, so that's where a lot of joyous decoration started for me, was in that body of
Okay.
work.
Next up, Jen. Okay.
Yeah, so this is just, I made every kind of functional pot in those days. This is a jam service. I made salt and pepper sets. Here's one. Oh, yeah, here. I have one right on my table from that period.
Handy. Lovely.
And cake stands and deviled egg servers and soup tureens, you name it. I think the soup tureen is next on this slideshow.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you
Love
see,
that.
the decoration really was, my friends told me I had horror vacui, which is Latin for fear of empty spaces.
Right. Right.
Like the inside of the lid was decorated, the underneath of the foot was decorated, everything was decorated. And
Lisa, we have a question. Jen, can you help us out with that?
Sure. I had the same question. Terry wanted to know, can you explain what slip casting is?
oh, sure. So this is slab built. This soup tureen is made from flat slabs. And it's large, so I wouldn't have cast this, but I did start casting the smaller things. So what is slip casting? Slip casting means I make a pot just like I would make it, and I leave off things like the handles, and I leave off some things that I want to have a lot of creativity with after it comes out of the mold. But I can have that pot that took me a couple of hours to build. I can have a mold made of that pot out of plaster. And then when I get that mold back, I can pour liquid clay, which is called casting slip. Slip is liquid clay. I can pour that clay into the mold, let it set up for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then pour it out. And essentially what it's done is created a shell. So the positive, the mold absorbs the slip, the liquid clay, it absorbs it. And then you pour out the excess, and now you've got the hollow interior. And then once it's stiff, in another hour or two, you can release it from the mold. So the mold's in a couple of parts, and it's held together with a big rubber band. So I did slip cast for a couple of years. At that time, I was doing the Baltimore Craft Show, the American Craft Council show in Baltimore. And I was selling to 50 galleries around the country. 50, that's a lot of galleries. Trying to keep them, you know. But during those years, most of those years that I was doing that, I was hand building everything. So once I started casting, you couldn't tell. Everything was different when it came out of the molds. I changed things. I used the molds in a pretty creative way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, Lisa, and thanks for that question, Terry. And we'd love to have all of you join us in the Q&A if you have a question for Lisa. And now we're looking at our first transition. Now, this is year 2005.
Right. So it's called Magpie ANU. ANU was Australian National University. So there I was in Australia doing a residency, which I had been fortunate enough to receive from the National Council. And these magpies really were enchanting to me. They were all over the place and at the university. They hung out and they had this confidence, and they walked around like they owned the courtyard. And I wanted to draw them, but I had, like I said before, this idea that I couldn't draw. But I had promised myself when I went and took this residency that I would stay open and that I would try new things. But man, it was hard. It was really hard. Internally, it was difficult because the body of work that I was leaving, which Jen just showed 3 slides of, the soup tureen, the jam service, the ewer, they were very resolved. I mean, you know, over that long a period of time, things really get circumscribed and resolved. And here I went to Australia to reinvent myself. So I knew I was there, but that doesn't mean it wasn't difficult to let go of something that felt very complete. And I was determined to let go of what felt very complete because it was done. After 15 years, I had pretty much explored all the permutations within the limits that I'd set for myself. So I didn't want to repeat myself because that would be like a slap in the face to where this all comes from, as far as I was concerned. So I was debating whether or not to draw these magpies, and lo and behold, a magpie hopped into the building. It just hopped right in, and it hopped all the way around the room until it stopped at my door, my studio door, and it cocked its head and it stared at me. And I was like, oh my God, if I ever wanted a sign, there it is, you know. So I allowed myself to draw the magpies. And this is just like one of the first ones. So, you know, I went to art school, graduate school. I have an MFA in ceramics, but my undergraduate degree is in English literature. I didn't go through all the things that people go through when they're in an undergraduate program in art, drawing, painting, printmaking, a million things, you know? So in some ways, that's a handicap, and in some ways, it's just pure grace, because then when you come to it, you come to it from yourself, you know, without any other references of what's right or wrong or good or bad. So in any event, that's just my story. That's
Sure.
what for me.
Is this when you first began with figures?
Yeah. It was in Australia. It was that magpie that came into the studio that convinced me. And then I started downloading images. Like after a couple of weeks of painting magpies, I thought, well, they're lovely, but they have nothing to do with home. So what's the American equivalent? And I thought American crow. So the first download from the computer, I looked for images of crow and printed out the images. And I went and grabbed the first sheet from the printer, and it had some text on it that said, crow turned himself into a pine needle, ... And I really felt like I was on a scavenger hunt, you know? So I thought, okay, I'll play. So I put that as a quote into a search engine, and down comes all this lore in my search from 2 continents. I'm in Australia. All the lore was from North America and from Australia, native peoples, about what the crow represents. Crow, raven, magpies, and blue jays are all part of the corvid family of birds. And so I started working with crow with a lot of gratitude for this creature coming into my life, you know, because I felt like crow sort of shepherded me, to mix a metaphor. Crow shepherded me into working with images. Real
And this
images.
is a much more recent piece that Jen has found for us.
Say that again.
This is a much more recent piece that Jen has pulled up.
This one here. Yeah. So
Yeah.
this is probably from 2008-ish, 2007, something like that, because it's after Australia. And it's a pretty large, yeah,
Okay.
that's right. 2006 to 2009 was when I was making that work. And the text around it, when I first started working with these portrait plates and text, the text came from the native peoples. And there I was in Australia. My kids were 5 and 8 years old, and they were in good hands with my ex-husband and all of our friends back in Doylestown. But the text was about, you know, conversation with country. It was like there was a conversation going on between the crows and the magpies, and between me being away, but me still being a mom, and, you know, reconciling those things. And me as an artist, just as a individual human being who wants very much to bring forth the stuff that knocks inside of me or in my field of awareness. So this is a quote from Rilke, the poet Rilke. It says, "I believe in all that has never yet been spoken. I want to free what waits within me, so that what no one has ever dared wish for may spring clear without my contriving, you know? That's why I don't try to plan too much, but I do try very hard to stay open in the studio so that I can catch these things as they come up.
Jen, next piece, please.
Right, so from that same era. So when I went to Australia, I started working with this dry brush slip, the slip again being liquid clay, but in this case it was more viscous, which means it had less flow property. It was more pasty. So I got more texture out of the slip itself, and the color palette changed as well from those pieces that you saw earlier with the muted jewel tones, like the jam service and the soup tureen. And here's my friend the crow again. And this is a quote on this cake stand from The Night Kitchen. Maurice Sendak. "Milk in the batter, we bake cake and nothing's the matter." Seemed appropriate for a cake stand.
He's one of the best too. I
Yeah.
love that you use Maurice Sendak with his creatures as well.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a little hand as a knob on this teapot. So it slipped itself in. I think that there's another slide that shows that more, that detail. Yeah, there you go. I don't know. I don't know why it was so hard for me to render images. I don't know why it was so hard for me to finally give myself permission to work with figures. All I know is that it was. And so I honor that. I'm like respectful of these parts of myself that are so slow and so scared. And I have, at this point in my life, I feel more like I'm nourishing those and not nourishing them to grow them, but nurturing them. Like they're young, dysregulated parts of me, that are just there. I don't really need to know a whole lot more about them, just that I don't want them driving the car. I want to give them a cup of tea and a nice blanket and make them comfortable. And I'm going to take another step over here, And so I keep taking steps and everything's fine.
What a great description of the creative process.
Right?
Okay,
I mean, that's my experience. I don't know what other people's experiences are, but I'm astonished at how much fear is in my field of awareness, just on any given day, all kinds of things. But the more internal work you do, the more aware you become of that internal dialogue. And so it's not for the faint of heart. That's all I can say.
so what kind of internal work, Lisa?
Oh, how shall I frame it? Spiritual work. I've been doing the work of Byron Katie, which is a spiritual practice, a form of inquiry, questioning stressful thoughts. It's a very specific method, but I've been doing it for about a dozen years, and it helps me see that the mind, it's like, just like we're not breathing ourselves, like our breath is happening, we're not trying to make it happen. Our blood is moving in our veins, we're not trying to make that happen. And thoughts are coming, and we're not doing that either. We're just not. I mean, they just keep coming and coming and coming and coming and coming. And I can direct my mind. I can say, let me give my mind a job. It loves that. Like, let me focus on gratitude. I'm so grateful to be here with you. I'm so grateful that 61 people are tuned in. What a blessing that is. And I would just love to hear from everyone that's on this call, either now or later. It's like so special to me to have this chance. So here I just gave my mind a job. And it took the job, and that was me speaking. I'm trying to stay present with this whole call and not like give into any kind of nervousness, so that I can come from an authentic place. But I wake up in the morning and I'm just coming out of that beautiful, blissful sleep. And then I notice my mind is constructing a me. Oh, yeah, house, blankets, a little cold. What do I have to do today? Oh, look at the calendar, look at your phone. It's like this construction happens. But who was I before I woke up? You know, that's what I'm curious about. What was that? I don't know if I'm making a whole lot of sense, but I'm doing my best here.
I think we all recognize that. So when I can understand that you're giving your mind the job to be grateful. You did a great job of that. That was really nice. So how do you give your mind the job of coming up with a new idea, having a theme, having a meaning to your art? Because, you can make beautiful objects, but you, Lisa, one can make beautiful objects, but your I think it's a real challenge for many artists to access something that they want to say and put it into their work because it's a different form of communication than language, right?
It
So how
is.
do you give your mind that job?
There's a couple things coming up. So you said what kind of spiritual practice? And I would say that, and like I'm studying the Enneagram now. I won't go into what that is, but I could spend the rest of my life studying the Enneagram. And it really at the end of the day, what it's about is cultivating presence. So any artist who's having trouble finding an idea, I say, just stop trying. Stop trying. Like there's so many, because if you're trying, you're coming from here. And this head is just not it's just not the thing that's going to bring you home. It has a job to play, it has a role to play, but it's not the thing. So I remember there's a beautiful, beautiful man named Robert Turner who's left this world now, ceramic artist. And he said, if you get stuck, he was such a gentle Quaker. If you get stuck and you don't know what to do, just wedge clay. Just wedge some clay. Now, my teacher, Bill Daly, would talk about materiality. And the reason why wedging clay might actually generate an idea is because you're touching the material. You're actually touching the material. You're engaging with the material. And if you don't have an idea, just start making anything. Literally make anything. I mean, don't you, when you go to a museum and you see folk art, this is what happens to me when I see folk art. It just transports me. I'm like, oh my God, I could make anything. I could pick up a piece of paper off the street and take a piece of charcoal and just start drawing. Like, it's so exciting because the creative impulse is human. It's not something that's only for some special rarefied few. Look at any child and tell me that they're not coming from that place, So engage. And, now that I'm running the studio, and it's a very vital, it's really a beautiful collection of people and it keeps growing. But everybody's making things and there's so many different voices after 2.5 years of just being here, they're starting to cultivate their voices. That happens automatically. So I think that there has to be less trying and more just authentic listening and stillness.
So I hear in a minute, but I think it's really important. You told me earlier that you need the silence, the stillness. So in order for there to be space for those ideas to come with you. So when do you engage, and when do you take that moment? You just told me earlier that you leave the studio and you just go for some quiet and you put all those thoughts away.
Are you asking when?
How do you know when to engage and when to be quiet?
And so that comes back to the awareness. And so any spiritual practice is going to cultivate awareness. So like this is a great question and I appreciate it. And I think that the discomfort one feels in their body, so we have the body center, the heart center, and the mind center, the head center. But when your body starts to feel uncomfortable, like you start to feel tension or anxiety, that's a good time. that's a good time to take a deep breath and to step outside, to step away from what you're doing. Or if you can do it on the fly. You don't have to take 5 minutes even. You don't have to step outside. It could be pouring rain or snowing or sleeting outside. You could just close your eyes and stay right where you are and feel your feet on the ground. Really like focus on your feet. Give that mind a job. The job is to feel my feet. The job is to feel my left pinky finger. And it brings you in. It silences all that other stuff. And it doesn't take hardly any time before the heart center opens. And you might say, you might try this and you might say, I don't feel it, Lisa. I don't feel my heart center open. I don't feel my mind. Well, I say it's a practice, and it's a practice that gets cultivated over time, just like your art making, anybody's art making. It gets cultivated over time, but we have to hang in there with ourselves. We have to hang in there with the process. We have to hang in there with the material. Nothing seems to come overnight. And I'm dealing with a lot of beginners in my studio space. And I marvel at how a couple of comments. One is, Lisa, I don't need any more bowls. Why do you keep asking me to make bowls? I don't need any more bowls. I'm like, creativity could give a shit about your cabinet space. Throw them against the brick wall. I don't care. Just keep making bowls. Like, just, this is the nature of ceramics, is to repeat and repeat and repeat. And there's a reason for that. We become proficient at what we practice. But creativity doesn't care. It has no relationship to quantity or the price of things, it doesn't have a conversation with those things. So we keep at it. And what calls us to keep at it? I don't know. But it's a burning thing. Some people say, I never felt like I had a choice to be an artist. I really felt like I had to. I have to make things. I moved to Frenchtown 3 years ago. Big transition in my life, big upheaval, new house, new studio, new town. It was a long time before I could get down to making my real own work. And man, if I didn't take this winter off from teaching, I think I would have lost my mind, because it's like I needed it. I need to go into those deeper places. And if those deeper places didn't call me, I wouldn't go. I wouldn't go, which is an argument for the Sunday painter. I just want to address that for a minute. Not everybody who makes art has to do it full time. The person who carves out some time on the weekend for themselves, absolutely as legitimate as any other artist. There is a way to continue to cultivate your practice, but you just have to keep going. Don't let anybody else define what the rules are around your practice, but you do have to practice. Otherwise it just becomes stagnant. You have to engage with the material. That's what I notice.
Lisa, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. I know people want to look at artwork, and we're going to do that now. And I know that you all have put some questions in the Q&A. We're going to get to those too. We'll look at a couple more pieces of artwork, and then we'll take some more of your questions. I just throw things at Jen and she's got to pick them up. I really appreciate it.
Doing her best. She's making a face. Thank God. Thank God for the tech-minded of the world.
That's right. All right.
Sorry, everyone. I just have too many things open and trying to do too much at once while listening to Lisa. So here we go.
Thank you, Jen.
Sure.
Right. So this is when I finally really embraced the figure. When I came back from Australia, I was rendering images, which helped me tell stories that pottery alone doesn't tell. But remember, I had been a potter, functional potter, for decades. So stepping away from function, and I never fully stepped away from function. I love function, but I was able to tell more stories. I was so excited when I started working with the figure that I made this piece called Rebirth, because after all those years of working in clay, to turn to like make a turn, and the same material is now giving me this whole other way of expressing myself. So in this piece, it's me in a nest, which is a crib, and my kids' t-shirts, I dipped in casting slip and I fired them so that the t-shirt disappeared and the clay form stayed. And the old work is up in the funnel. You know, there's a bunch of stuff up in the funnel that represents my life up until then. But my hands are blooming with this new growth. So that's what this piece is about. And that dress that she's in was actually a dress that I got from a vintage store. And I pulled it apart and I dipped it in casting slip and I put it back on her, which sounds crazy, but you know, you build up enough layers so that you've got enough clay so it's not terribly fragile.
It's an amazing piece.
Thank you. You know, I haven't kept much of my work, but when I look at some images, there's some pieces I kind of wish I did still have, because they were so personal. You know, they were so much about a time, but I have the images here. So this is great. This is actually better in a way. Yeah, so we can keep going.
Let's take one more piece of artwork and then we'll get to those questions in the Q&A.
So this piece, so when I started working with the figure, I started with human figures. That's what we're seeing now, is these couple of human figures. And I had this idea. So this one's called, She Thought She Knew, so she kept her eye on the sky. And it was like, she thought she knew that the birds live out there and that, you know, she's putting a beak on like a mask, and she's got a nest that she made on her hat just so she could attract the birds. Say, come play with me. I'm a safe place. Come hang out here. And so if you go to the next slide, you'll see that quite by accident, the back of her head becomes, I could go into so many stories, but I won't. It's just like, this was a surprise to me that the back of her head ended up with a hole. And I was like, oh, you know, see, this is the thing, is like the subconscious mind for me when I'm making art. I'm creating the circumstances and the conditions so that things can spring up. And then I have to be present enough to notice them and not just go past them. So this hole opens up in the back of her head. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh my God, the bird lives inside of her. The bird is inside her head. It's like the nest, she is the nest, you know, it's not out there. And then of course that made so much sense to me because, you know, as I've gotten older and older, I've become more and more self-referential and less defining myself by some external standards, you know? And I think that that's what maturity is. That's what a long life gives us, is a chance to hopefully become who we are and not worry about whether we fit in with the rest of the world or are approved of by the rest of the world. That stuff doesn't ever go away entirely, but it's a whole lot more fun and a lot more free to be who you are, you know? So that's what this piece was. And here, this is another one I would love to have, but it's gone. They're all gone. And that's okay too. You know, like it's, people say, you know, how do you let go of all this work? And the truth is that the work is the thing that's left after the thing. I think we talked about this on our pre-call. And I think it's an important thing to say, is that when I'm creating in my studio, like the work that's at the Michener in 2025 will be the representation of the thing. The pieces aren't the thing. What happens in the studio and all that discovery, it's so precious to me. It's so sacred to me and valuable to me. That act of creation and those moments of creation. But they can't be held. They can't be given or taken away. They're always there. But the object that remains afterwards represents that alchemy. Yeah, so we can keep going or take some questions.
Just, I want to honor that people have written in their questions, so let's take some of those, Jen. I can do it. Okay. So how large is Rebirth to be able to put clothes on it?
Yeah, so that was a real woman's dress. So she was life size.
Okay. That was from Jim, who loves the conversation about the mind and the body. Just pick up the brush and feel the medium. So true. Jim is an artist as well. Joanne asks, can you share how rabbits have been an influence in your art? And those are coming up soon.
Um, the way I described how crow came along and then checking the native people's understanding of what crow represents was really important to me. So when I started working with rabbit, it was because of the ears, because I was making a piece about creativity and these rabbits were on a skate and I wanted there to I wanted there to be a sense of motion so the ears could be going back. That's the first piece that I used a rabbit on. But when I looked up all the lore about rabbits, it all resonated with me. But the thing that really got me about rabbits is that in my own backyard, they're not exactly in short supply, but they're prey animal. They're prey to almost everything out there. And the fact that they thrive in our environment isn't lost on me. So it's like not through the individual, but through the collective, they have managed to not only survive, but thrive, even though they are food for so many other creatures. So to me, I've talked about fear and how it's in my field of awareness a lot. I think the rabbit's like a hero to me because it has to deal with fear every single day, but it's still going strong. And I love that.
Do you keep track of who has your works?
No, not well, I mean, sort of, not formally. I know who has some very important pieces, and I have some collectors that just collect and collect and collect. So some people have a great deal of my work, but yeah, yeah.
Okay. And then going back to the slipcast, Nan wants to know, did you ever use your slipcast forms to assemble them in combination, like your early combined forms?
That's a great question. And no, I didn't, because they were really intended to serve my production in those days when I was doing all those galleries around the country. And when I moved, I got rid of all the molds because it was really time to let them all go.
Okay. We've got rabbits, Jen, at look at those.
Yeah, so I was working with found objects for a period of time. And found objects might still come into my work from time to time. They really helped catalyze when we were talking before about where do ideas come from, or when an artist is kind of at a crossroads and they're not sure where to go next. Working with found objects can be a nice catalyst. And in the beginning, when I was working with found objects, I had no idea what I was looking for. I'd walk into a flea market or an antique mall. Somebody would say, "Can I help you?" And I'd say, "I wish you could help me. I have no idea what I'm looking for." So it would be more like a tug in my chest or a tightness in my chest, something, I'd pick something up and it had some kind of a charge on it for me. And I'd put it down and I'd walk away. And if I couldn't stop thinking about it, then that was a good idea to go pick that up. So I got better at it, just like any other practice. I got better at it as time went by. But this was an old Italian tall lampshade, and it probably sat in my basement in Doylestown for at least 2 years. And then I was making that rabbit figure when I was teaching a workshop on a standing figure, and it just hit me that I could attach it, like that I could extend its skirt. And, I ran down to the basement. So that object was in my head. It stayed in the back of my mind that I still had that thing. So this piece is about coming home to yourself, and there's these flowers that are part of the metal. The metal obviously doesn't shrink, the clay shrinks. So engineering it so that those scalloped edges would align with the armature of that shade was a nice engineering task for me. But inside, hanging from inside of the rabbit, you can't really see it in this image, but there are buds. There's these blooming flowers on the outside, but inside there are all these buds, and they have gold luster on them, on their stems, describing like the source of life being sacred. So yeah, there they are, those little ones that are all hanging like ornaments inside.
It's a really beautiful expression and pose that rabbit has.
Thank you. And so, alongside of making sculpture, I was also still making pottery. And at some point they started to merge in with each other. So this is a vase that's part 2D and part 3D. And you can go through these images a little quicker. And because it develops, and you can see how it develops. So, there's the crow picture. Just being able to notice that a picture is always looking like a bird. Those pouring vessels are always looking like a bird to me. And then this was a piece from a show at the Clay Studio in Philadelphia that I had in November of 2020. It was so great because, of course, it was COVID time. If it hadn't been for lockdown, this show wouldn't have been nearly as glorious as it ended up being. And really, for me, it was the most ambitious work I had made to date. And these pieces were much larger than I was used to working. So I challenged myself to work more large so that I could have a presence in the studio with these pieces. But this is about impermanence, how we come into this life, we take a run, and we leave this life. So it's birth and death and everything in between. And they're all vases. All of these have tubes inside that are removable so that you could have flowers in them.
How big are they?
They're about, can you
Oh,
see? So I don't know, like the one with its legs and feet out is probably, I'm gonna say like 22 inches long. And maybe they're about 14 inches high. But
Lisa,
each one started out as a flat slab. So they're all vessels. And depending on how I cut the darts, I could get the gesture, and then additions are made, the feet and the heads, but the bodies, the thighs and the bellies, they're all pushed out of that flat slab.
it almost looks like the early photography series of motion.
Muybridge, right? Wasn't it
Yeah,
Muybridge?
exactly.
Animals in Locomotion. I looked at them, and darn it, if there weren't any rabbits. I got I think there's 6 in this series. I got 5 made. I lined them up in the studio, and it was like, there has to be one more. And it was that second from the right one that was missing.
Lisa, both Jean and Cheryl would like to know if you make preliminary drawings or you keep sketchbooks books of your ideas.
Because I didn't have an undergraduate degree in art and I never learned how to draw formally, I don't draw very much in terms of sketching out ideas. I do a lot of drawing in my head, believe it or not. If you see me in my studio, a lot of the time I'm just sitting there staring. That's what it would appear, that I'm just sitting there staring. But I'm drawing in my head. I'm developing ideas, and they actually get cataloged. I can pull them up later, which is just what what I've practiced. If I had put all that time practicing drawing, I'd be really facile with drawing, you know? And then you look at a wall like this and you say, yeah, surely, so you don't know how to draw. I cannot tell you how much courage it took for me to pull all this up out of myself. And how I had to break all my rules to do it. I just had to tell this story. And this story it's really the story of like the hero's journey. And if you go back to that last slide, Jen, so it's an urban tale about a bird that falls flat out of the sky exhausted. And it has to make a choice between, the legend says that if it flies up to the highest peak of the tallest mountain, which is like a bald spot, right? Means it's going to be prey. And it's at its midlife. The hawk, it finds its way to its midlife, and it has to make this choice. It's either going to take the path of courage and fly up to the highest peak of the tallest mountain, pull out all of its talons, which are split, pull out all of its feathers, which are falling out anyway, and smash its beak on the rock. And if it does that, the legend says it will all grow back, fully formed, and it will have the second half of its life to hunt, with great agility and all the expertise of its former life. Or it can do nothing and still have a decent life. It just won't be able to hunt as well. And, its life kind of spirals. So that was the kernel, that was the seed. That story I carried around in my head for God knows how long, at least 15 years, maybe 20 years. That story just stuck in the back of my head. And so I was that hawk. I was at that point, I was going through the end of a very long marriage that had completed itself, and my kids were fledging off into their lives, which was what the whole point of raising them was for. But it was this big dissolution of identities, I was exhausted. And as I made these plates, these two series, I ended up putting them in a Vesica Pisces on the wall. Each of those ovals is probably 8 feet wide. Those largest plates are like 24, 25 inches across. I really pulled everything up so that I could tell this story in a way, but I was living the story. And so initially I thought it was going to be about virtue and vice. It's going to be about strength or weakness. And it just turned out it wasn't virtue or vice, and it wasn't strength or weakness. Like you can be cultivating all of your strengths and all of your wisdom, and still, like, the best thing you can do some days is just sit down and eat bowl after bowl of ice cream. It's like all gets mixed in together, it's not so austerely black and white. So on either side of that Vesica Pisces, you could see a correlation, the hawk that finds the courage to fly up to the mountain, and the hawk that says, I think I'm going to get on a plane and take a vacation, and I did not expect them to be so hysterically funny either. Like, I was so surprised when I would come up with these images, and all the text around all of those plates came into my mind, but only through stillness, only through intention. And I don't know what else to say about that. Like, I really was patient with it, and I could feel it when it was right. You can feel it when it's right, and you can feel it when it's wrong. So obviously I'm talking about intuition, and we all have that, we all have all these things. We just choose what we're going to cultivate and what we're not going to cultivate.
Lisa, it sounds like your work is a journal of interior journey, interior dialogue.
More and more. Yeah. And it's becoming more overtly so as I get older. So this work for the Michener, I'm so curious. I'm really, truly just curious to see where the heck it goes. The carrot is the stick. That piece was such a crack up to me. The carrot is the stick. It's like the carrot, the thing, like, if you think you're making your work because you're going to get into a gallery or a museum, or you're going to make money, it's like, you might as well just be beating yourself with that carrot. It's just like, it's not what it's about, It doesn't have a relationship to that. So on this carrot, though, I put all the words of all the things I have to make room for when I go into my studio. So self-doubt is there, fear is there, I don't know what else is there, but that carrot was covered in words that represent the emotions.
Lisa, we are out of time. We've got a couple of quick questions. Let's try to get these done for the people who asked them. Nan wants you to know that you do know how to draw. I'm going to ask the questions quickly together and you can answer them as you will. DM wants to know, what are your rules now? And Cheryl says, since COVID, online art classes have really taken hold, do you see the possibility of clay classes in the future?
Go back to DM's question.
What are your rules now?
I don't, I don't know that I have rules. Well, I won't make anything that I don't care about. I won't do that. I
Okay.
guess I do have some rules. I won't do anything for money. I won't do that. I won't make something just to have something to sell that I know I can sell. Because that's like a waste of my time. Because I'm going to sell it anyway. I'm going to find a way to eat. I'm going to find a way to live. And I'm doing great. Everything's fine. It's so easy to give into those impulses. Scarcity. It's like a scarcity impulse. But I don't believe it anymore. I'm so happy to be able to say it's not that it doesn't cross my mind or it doesn't take me some days. It does. But by and large, I have faith, I really do have faith. And then the last question was, and thank you, Nan, for saying that. It's just such a struggle still, But what was the last thing? Nope, I think she's frozen. Do you remember, Jen, what the
Yep.
last?
Cheryl
Online
asked
clay
since,
classes.
Oh, the online classes, yeah. Honestly, I started, I did some, it's not my jam. I don't think that's gonna be what I do. But a lot of people do it and they do it really well. And there's some great potters out there doing it. And oh my goodness, Ceramic Arts Network. There's so many platforms for lots of stuff online for play. But come to Frenchtown because it's a great little town. And there's a ton of workshops that we're presenting this summer. 5 different artists teaching, which is super exciting.
There are lots of thanks. There are lots of thanks, Lisa. Laura Igo says, she's really looking forward to seeing what emerges for your exhibition at the Michener next year. I think we all are really excited about that. We're excited that the Micheners, and you shared so much with us. Thank you very much, Lisa Naples.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much for Laura Igo and Laura Womack and Jen and everybody who signed on. Thank you so much, you guys. It was a lot of fun. Mwah.